I'm Daisy.
And I'm Terry.
And this is the Monday Mindset Podcast,
where we share things of interest to us and hopefully to you.
So let's get started with episode number, there are so many different ways I want to say this. 1, 2, 3. 123. Take your pick, listeners.
And this week, it's Daisy's turn to share something with us. Daisy, what do you have?
Well, Terry, we were chatting before we started, but I have been getting inspiration from various different places. And as I've mentioned a few times recently, newsletters have proved very interesting. And this is actually a newsletter that I used to get a long time ago that I had completely forgotten about. I used to find it interesting. And it was tied to my old French email. So I haven't been getting it for a long time. And I can't remember how I stumbled across it. I think I was clearing out that old email or something. But anyway, I saw one from them and remembered, so I resubscribed. And the newsletter in question is confusingly called TED. So I always think of TED Talks when I see it because it's capital TED. But it's not. TED stands for the Empowerment Dynamic. And the newsletter that I'm going to be talking about, I'm going to be talking about some other things as well, but the newsletter in question, the headline caught my attention, The Problem with Problem Solving. And we've talked about the problems and pitfalls of being a problem solver. I think we discussed this quite a lot when we were talking about Brené Brown's book. I'm one of those, like to get in and try and fix things. So this is the problem with problem solving. And as I mentioned, TED. Well, TED stands for the Empowerment Dynamic. And this was created by somebody called David Emerald. He's an author and the creator of TED. And he works with somebody called Donna Zajonc. I have no idea whether I'm pronouncing that properly or not. And she is a coach that's involved with this program and an author as well. They're listed as being partners. I'm not sure whether that's just business partners or they're also partners in life as well. I have a feeling both. I first came across them, I think, when I was doing some learning about IFS, which I've mentioned before. One of these days, I'll find a way of covering it in one of these episodes. IFS stands for Internal Family Systems, and it was the structure that my counsellor used. And I got really interested in it and did a lot of further reading. And I think this is how their website first came up. So a little bit of background is needed as to what TED is. TED, the Empowerment Dynamic, is a positive alternative to the drama triangle, or as they refer to it, the dreaded drama triangle, or DDT. But the drama triangle was first talked about by somebody called Stephen Karpman, apparently, in the 1960s. So when people are in conflict, they tend to step into 3 primary roles or patterns of destructive and reactive behavior. And this is what the drama triangle describes. Now, the primary role is the victim, and the victim feels powerless over the situation and often gives up on what they want. They might step back, disengage, complain, or say something like, "Poor me, woe is me." The second role, which kind of works in direct conflict with the victim, is the persecutor. The person who is playing this role blames the victim and tries to control or manage the situation, and often says things like, "Who caused this problem?" or "Who is to blame?" And when this conflict dynamic is in play, the third role steps in, and this is the rescuer. And they want to try and repair the conflict that is going on between the victim and the persecutor by helping and pleasing. And they are hoping to alleviate the suffering of the victim by either fixing, quote unquote, them or the situation. But they are, in fact, unintentionally adding energy to this conflict. Now, people can shift in and out of all three roles. The result is that they end up feeling trapped in the DDT, or dreaded drama triangle, and most often all of them end up feeling victimized by the situation. And these drama roles are behavior strategies that the ego creates to manage its anxiety about what it doesn't like or want. And some aspects are useful and help us learn to cope and survive, and we tend to learn them early on in life. However, they become limiting. They're not necessarily bad, but they tend to limit our effectiveness and prevent more creative ways to deal with life's challenges. But if we start recognizing these patterns when they arise, we can turn them into something that is more empowering. And this is where TED comes in. So the victim, as I've already mentioned, is the one who's right at the center of this dynamic, and they feel powerless and at the mercy of life's events. They may avoid taking responsibilities for their actions. Their focus is on the problem, and they tend to wait for someone or something to come along and fix it. They tend to find it easier to disengage and just give up on what they want. And then the persecutor, as I mentioned before, is this key opposing force. And what's really driving them is that they really fear being a victim. And they tend to use blame and defensiveness to control others. And they want to be right or win at all costs. Tend to have not very much compassion and empathy. And they are really uncomfortable with ambiguity or uncertainty. Now, the persecutor can be a person, but it can also be a situation, like a health condition, for example. And the persecutor dominates the time and energy of the victim. And then it's this rescuer that completes the triangle. And they want to be helpful by intervening in this victim-persecutor dynamic. They also, though, often want to be valued for helping others. Their focus is on the pain of others. They tend to avoid their own feelings and fail to realize that their pleasing behaviors keeps others disempowered by doing things for them rather than letting them work it out for themselves. They love to be the heroic problem solver. And this brings us neatly to the article in the newsletter. So they talk about how problem solving works really well when you need something specific, when there actually is a fix that you're looking for. You know, something's broken, you need to know what's wrong with it, you need to know how to fix it. It's kind of a direct trajectory from A to B. But when you're dealing with more complicated and nuanced situations, there are some unintended consequences of what on the surface looks like the good role, the problem solver, this heroic problem solver. And they use the workplace as an example, but really, you can make it work for anything. And the example they use is a project at work that's gone sideways. And you and your colleagues meet up to talk about how to fix it. And they say that when the conversation starts by going over what's happened in the past, the dreaded drama triangle tends to come into play pretty quickly. So you have the persecutor and the victim roles saying things like, we didn't have a big enough budget. We didn't have enough support from management. We're overworked. And the rescuer might agree to take on more work. and or offer up ideas about how they can do more next time to make it more successful. And they say that this approach is rooted in the victim orientation because everyone ends up feeling victimized by the problem. And remember also that you can jump into and out of these different roles. And I don't know about people listening, but I know when I was reading these descriptions, I sort of, recognized some of my behaviors in all of them. I didn't just fit one role or another. Also, when the focus is on what happened in the past and trying to dissect and rearrange history, that's just not possible or helpful, really. There's lots of if only we'd done this or if only we'd done that. Without clarifying what outcome you do want, they say, you just keep revisiting the past problem and you cause the problem to expand. They say what you focus on expands. And it's really easy to stay focused on problems because the ego just prefers to stick with what it knows. Thank you very much. Focusing instead on the outcome means that you start looking forward. You start to flesh out a future that hasn't been created yet. This is where the ego gets really nervous because it doesn't like uncertainty very much. So it tricks you into just rehashing the past because that's a known scenario. But they maintain shifting to the future will shift your mindset into a more creative space. And apparently you can't focus on the future and the past at the same time. They say that our brains just don't work that way. So if you look forwards and you open up the possibilities of noticing information and opportunities that support what you want to create. And I know when I was reading these things and writing notes, just the change in language just starts feeling expansive. You can almost sort of feel your mind expanding rather than that sort of focusing inwards and feeling anxious about it. And this is the creator part of TED. More about that in just a moment. But back to the work example, different questions would start emerging if you shift more towards looking forwards rather than rehashing the past. You will start asking questions like, what is working that helps us get closer to what we have worked out is the outcome that we want? What do we want to create? How can we build on what is working? What problems do we need to address that are getting in the way of progress towards our desired outcomes? So you just need to hold the future in your mind as a guidepost. Just quickly to go back to round off TED, the empowerment dynamic, the three roles of the dreaded drama triangle are replaced with the new and positive roles of TED. And so the victim is replaced with the creator. And this is the central role of TED. Creators know that they can choose their response to life's challenges. The creator is, instead of being problem focused, is outcome focused and powered by passion. I rather like that. They focus on what inspires them. See what I mean about all this language? It just feels uplifting and positive. And they generate forward energy with one small step at a time. And their opponent, the persecutor, is now a challenger. But instead of using blame and defensiveness, the challenger consciously builds up others and encourages them to learn and grow despite some of the difficult situations that life might throw at us. They're catalysts for learning, and they're willing to put their head above the parapet and stand for vision when others may not want to. Rather than criticizing or blaming, a challenger inspires others to reach for the higher collective good. And they are willing to shake things up and get right into the root of things. They're sometimes called truth tellers in service of outcomes. Now, that third role, the rescuer, in TED becomes the coach. They see the creator in those they support, and they are ultimately resourceful and resilient. So there are no more victims, there are just creators. That reminded me of your acorn analogy from the other day. It's all there within you, and the coach sees this. Unlike their negative counterpart, the rescuer, who reinforces the powerlessness of someone in a victim role, a coach uses curiosity and listening to support others and nudge them towards discovering the solution for themselves. They're best placed when they have a non-attachment to the outcome of others and are supportive and encouraging. So it was actually a very, very short newsletter just about problem solving, but I felt I couldn't really talk about that without telling you about the dreaded drama triangle and also about TED. And it was reading about TED, that's what I first saw when I was doing this research. But this problem solver headline jumped out at me because, as I've admitted before, that's me, and it's something I think we mentioned in last week's episode, something that you've taught me a lot about, to be more of a coach than a rescuer.
One of the things I really like about what you described, Daisy, is when you described the drama triangle, the dreaded drama triangle, it's kind of like that music, dun, dun, dun.
Yeah.
And I could imagine myself in those various roles. And of course, I don't want to see myself in the persecutor role, but I can totally see how I could step into that role, definitely could step into the victim role, and definitely into the rescuer role. I can see justification for any one of those places in the triangle and see how they happen. But I also can see how having people in each of those places in the triangle just creates a problematic dynamic that, often just goes into a stalemate kind of, no progress, no solution kind of thing. And so as you started talking about the creator, the challenger, and the coach, I would love to see myself in any one of those roles. Those sound empowering. Those sound forward moving, creative, productive, and I think maybe you learned more about this from the article as well, but how does it happen that people learn these new roles versus getting caught up in these old roles? I assume people need to facilitate it for them, at least to get them going.
Yes, well, this is, of course, what they teach and coach. And there's a book, well, he's written the book on TED, and I forget the name of her book now, but she, I think, takes it a step further or in a different direction. I'll put the names of the books in the show notes, but yeah, I very much like it. It feels that the dreaded drama triangle feels like you're held within it and you're bouncing around inside it. It felt very much like a prison, whereas the empowerment dynamic, it's still a triangle, it still has the three roles, but it feels very outward looking. It feels very freeing and open and expansive. It's still got that triangle at the starting point, but it's just has a whole different dynamic to it.
But the initial triangle is like a triangle of wrestlers. It's like people trying to wrestle for their side, or, maybe the rescuer is also trying to wrestle for the victim, but it's not really working together toward a common resolution. It's just like, we've just got to fix this. And either I'm going to dominate and win, or the victim's going to take a strong enough role and win, or whatever, but that's not really going to move.
And the interesting thing is that everyone ends up feeling victimized.
Yeah.
Whichever role they're in.
And it's not going to move the overall kind of thing in question forward. And the new dynamic, the new triangle that you described really is about, okay, none of these roles are a bad role to be in, and they're all working together to create solutions and find ways of working through this. I'd love to see it in practical use.
Yes, you need some more examples to see how it plays out. Like, I'd really like to see how it plays out, where they mentioned how the persecutor doesn't have to be a person. It can be like a health condition. Mm-hmm. So it would be interesting reading through an example of how that dynamic works out, where that persecutor role is a health condition. You can see how you can kind of feel how it would work, that the victim would feel trapped by the persecutor, and you could almost maybe see how it's happening, where someone sort of comes in and wants to rescue it and say, well, you've just got to do this. This is how you do it. And I'm sure we can all think of somebody who sort of plays out that typical kind of victim role, who's persecuted by a health condition. They feel overwhelmed by it. They don't feel like they can escape it, and they're held in their past or in the constant quote unquote failures of the present, and they just can't see their way out of it. And various people might try and step in as that rescuer role and offer advice, and you should try keto, you should try low carb, you should try fasting, you should try do this. And because they're so stuck in that role, there's always a reason why they can't try it, or they've tried it and it doesn't work, and they can't break out of this dreaded drama triangle. It's almost for every part of the role has to find a different dynamic to try and break out. This is where I was mentioning about that. And this is the problem with problem solving, is you have to find a way of meeting people where they're at and helping them find their own solutions. Because if you just keep throwing solutions at them, they'll keep finding a reason why that won't work.
Absolutely. And in your example of maybe a health condition being in the older dynamic, the persecutor, in the new dynamic as that one being the challenger, to really look at, what am I learning because of this health condition? And I've heard a few people that I work with in my daily work be able to start looking at things like this. And at first it might sound really weird, but let's say I was diagnosed with maybe fatty liver disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease or something. And this causes me to learn about something that's harming me that I didn't realize I could be doing differently. A client recently said something like she kind of almost had to change her view on something, and it's almost good that I found out that this thing was harming me, because otherwise I would have kept doing it until it couldn't be resolved, or until it caused my demise. Versus, it's good that I know that this has this effect on me. Maybe it's, finding out about an allergy or something.
Yeah, that's a great example, because it's it sets you a challenge that encourages learning. And I mean, you have people coming to you all the time. They've been set this challenge almost. They've been challenged by something that ends up leading them to seek out, or somebody recommends, or however they get to it, but they get put in a position of learning and changing and moving towards a different future.
Definitely a switch out of being in that victim role.
Yeah.
Feeling persecuted.
Just keep rehashing the past and what's happened before. Let's set a different outcome and start working towards that. And I know it's often easier said than done. It's not to say that it's suddenly a switch that you can make and everything's easy. But yes, something to think about.
Well, now we've just made that all fit my career path. And it's like, oh, yeah, absolutely.
So, yes, this might be one of those books I go on to read. Oh, see, it's me now with the creaky chair. I have a feeling it's quite a short read. I might go on to do it. It just, yes, like I say, I stumbled across it, and as I was talking about it in these different roles, that's one of the parts of the IFS process, where you identify these different problematic parts of yourself, and actually one of the end part of the process is that they take on different roles.
Mm-hmm.
So you just switch that perspective. So I'm sure that's how I came across this website in the first place. But yes, I think there's lots of useful things in there to dig into. So yes, go and check it out.
I'm thinking even within families that drama triangle happens, the adolescent, one parent, the other parent, and, just really working on switching up how you frame that could really change the dynamic of the change process for all three.
Absolutely.
Very cool. Well, I know, Daisy, this encourages me to continue to look at the dynamics that happen, in work settings, in familial settings, friendship settings. Recognize this, hadn't used the drama triangle before, but recognize that there's a different way to look at it and different ways to approach whatever part of that triangle I'm in. So thank you for sharing this.
You're very welcome. And I look forward to what you're going to share next week. In the meantime, of course, as always, have a very wonderful week.
Take good care, everybody. See you soon, Daisy.